All right, everybody. I believe we have Jen Daskal with us now. It's truly humbling when not only thinking of the firepower in this room, but just thinking about people like Sam Howerton, people like Jen Daskal. You know, a common question you hear in this line of work is what keeps you up at night? But when I think about what lets me sleep at night, I think of how inspired I am, by their commitment to this mission-driven work, pretty thankless work, often invisible work. I bet she sleeps with her phone if she sleeps. So, you know, I want you to look in our program at her bio. Her current title, though, places her in the White House as Deputy Homeland Security Advisor, Deputy Assistant to the President. She has graciously given some of us her time today, and she will be taking a couple questions, and we don't have to worry about her plane getting stuck anywhere because she's coming to us remotely. So I'm going to turn the floor over, or I guess I'm turning the walls over, so to speak, to our next speaker, Jen Daskal.
Great, thank you. And good morning, and thanks for that kind introduction. It is great to join you today, at least virtually, and congratulations on your ribbon cutting for this new location. I'm very sorry that my schedule is such that I could not join in person today. In my role as Deputy Homeland Security Advisor, I support the Homeland Security Advisor and ultimately the President. And we have one primary task, which is to help keep America and Americans safe. And therefore, the topic of this conference is of core importance to our work. And so I'm just so grateful to be here, grateful for all the work that all of you do, and hope that I can kick off the conference with a few framing remarks to first provide a laydown of what we're seeing in terms of a very evolving threat landscape, to describe what we're doing in response, and three, lay out some of our critically important longer-term prevention work, which I know is a focus for all of you. So on the evolving threat landscape, as I know you all know, the terrorism threat landscape has evolved significantly in the 2+ decades since the September 11th, 2021 attacks. The threat today is much more diffuse, ideologically diverse, and geographically dispersed than it was 2 decades ago, 20 years ago. Meanwhile, the Hamas attacks on October 7th and the resulting Hamas-Israel conflict has only served to further complicate an already complicated threat landscape. And so I want to start by talking about foreign terrorist organizations and to note at the outset the success of US-led global counterterrorism operations over the past 2 decades. As a result of this work, ISIS and Al-Qaeda's global organizations have been at relatively low points after years of degradation thanks to these efforts. But the threat posed by these groups and others nonetheless persists, and I have 3 key points to note about that. First, in the wake of the October 7th attacks, we quickly observed groups across the ideological spectrum seeking to exploit the attack for their own goals. This includes, of course, Iran and its proxies and partners, including the Houthis, Lebanese Hezbollah, and the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria. Second, while we know that ISIS has suffered significant setbacks, including the loss of 3 overall ISIS emirs in 2022 and early 2023, they are also an adaptable organization. And both ISIS and ISIS Khorasan, or what we call ISIS-K, have demonstrated a capability and intent to conduct external operations, as exemplified by the deadly January 3rd attack in Kerman, Iran, that killed more than 80 and wounded dozens more, and the March attack at the Moscow Concert Hall, which killed more than 130. Third, images from the Gaza conflict and associated messaging in multiple languages have expanded the pool of susceptible people, of those susceptible to mobilization from violence, and the pool of potential recruits. This is something that we are acutely focused on. This then takes me to the homeland. The threat environment in the homeland, as everyone here knows, is complex. The top domestic terrorism threat comes from those characterized as domestic violent extremists, to include both racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, which we call REMVs, and anti-government or anti-authority violent extremists. These individuals espouse a wide array of ideologies and are motivated by a number of different grievances. This is not new. We have seen the horrific violence and devastation caused by REMVs in the past few years, who were responsible for shootings in Charleston, South Carolina, Poway, California, Pittsburgh, El Paso, and Buffalo. And the president has spoken out multiple times against domestic terrorism. As he has said, and I'm quoting him now, domestic terrorism, driven by hate, bigotry, and other forms of extremism, is a stain on the soul of America. It goes against everything our country strives for, and it poses a direct challenge to our national security, democracy, and unity, unquote. And as I will discuss in more detail in a minute, in June 2021, recognizing the challenge, he released the first ever national strategy for countering domestic terrorism, which lays out key steps to counter this threat to our democracy. We are also deeply focused on the threat posed by those inspired by foreign terrorist organizations, including ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and thanks to the enhanced screening and vetting, work with foreign partners, and other security measures, it is increasingly difficult for foreign terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda to directly attack the homeland. But we know that there is a continued risk posed by those inspired by these terrorist organizations, and we are acutely focused on that risk. So let me talk a little bit about our response. We first obviously need to understand the threat in order to disrupt it. But I want to talk about now all the things that we do in response to what we know and what we are continually learning and reevaluating. First, we continue to build on our years of successful counterterrorism work, working closely with key allies and partners across the globe to identify and disrupt terrorist operatives and leaders who wish to do us harm. We have remained in Iraq and Syria, which has already allowed us to capture or kill at a steady pace key ISIS figures who seek to reconstitute the threat to the world that ISIS once posed before the United States led a global coalition to defeat it, as well as to address other key terrorists. In February 2022, operating on the president's orders, U.S. military forces successfully targeted Hajj Abdullah, the leader of ISIS. Later that year, in August, at the president's direction, the United States successfully conducted an airstrike in Kabul, Afghanistan, that killed the emir of Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri. And a year ago, the president authorized an operation in northern Somalia that resulted in the death of Bilal al-Sudani, a key operator and facilitator for ISIS's global network, as well as a number of other ISIS operators. We have also worked and continue to work to protect the safety of our personnel at home and abroad. In the aftermath of the October 7th attack, the president directed his team to ensure both the homeland and U.S. facilities and personnel abroad were prepared for potential retaliatory acts from terror organizations or individuals inspired by events in the region. We have had intense and continue to have intense and sustained coordination across all elements of the government to ensure the fullest possible visibility into and prevention of threats to our homeland and our people and facilities overseas. Second, we are pushing out our border, vetting individuals before they get on planes, working with partners to help them identify and take actions against persons of concern that are transiting their border, stopping them before they arrive on our soil. Third, we have increased our vigilance at our border. We have enhanced our screening and vetting, instituted recurrent vetting of migrants to identify newly uncovered threats, and detain those who pose a public safety threat. And fourth, we are surging resources and increasing terrorism-related investigation and prosecutions to match the threats. As just one example, DOJ, the Department of Justice, has formed a domestic terrorism unit within the National Security Division's counterterrorism section to better coordinate with the U.S. attorney's offices, the the FBI, and the others who work together to investigate and prosecute domestic violent extremists and terrorism subjects as appropriate. And we have enhanced interagency coordination between the Department of Homeland Security, the intelligence community, FBI, and the Department of Justice to effectively address the threat, employing a combination of Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice criminal detention authorities to address potential threats when they emerge and as appropriate. This is what we're doing in response to particular threats and acute threats. But I also want to talk about our longer term strategy as well. What are we doing beyond the immediate? So let me talk a little bit about our longer term thinking as well. We are implementing the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism, as I mentioned already. We are educating the public. The Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and the National Counterterrorism Center have recently updated their U.S. Violent Extremist Mobilization Indicators booklet, which details observable behaviors that could signal whether individuals are pursuing ideologically motivated violent extremist activities. More than 40,000 copies of this booklet have been disseminated to partner organizations, including state, local, tribal, and territorial law enforcement partners to date, and it's also available online. And we are also increasing the rigor and value of intelligence production on terrorism and related issues. The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security have vastly increased the production of analysis on domestic terrorism threats, highlighting the diversity of those threats in the United States, including recent products discussing threats to the Jewish community, other religious minorities, and the LGBTQ plus community, as just some examples. We are investing in building stronger international partnerships to tackle racially or ethnically motivated violent extremism. The Department of State and the Department of Justice together launched the Counterterrorism Law Enforcement Forum in 2002, which for the first time gathered international law enforcement, prosecutors, and other criminal justice personnel to focus on transnational racially or ethnically motivated violent extremism. And we are engaging the private sector as well, who are critical partners as we enlist their help in our response to the threat of terrorism. In April 2023, as just one example, the Department of Treasury launched a domestic terrorism resource website for private and public entities seeking a better understanding of domestic violent extremists and associated financial activity. Financial institutions are, we know, using these resources to inform their own anti-money laundering programs. And finally, critically, hugely importantly, we are focused on prevention. Last year, the administration launched the Prevention Resource Finder, the first ever website with a comprehensive list of federal resources available to help state and local governments, community organizations, houses of worship, schools, and others prevent acts of targeted violence and terrorism. The new website offers nearly 100 resources from 17 federal partners, all in one place. It is a one-stop shop for finding information about prevention that the U.S. government can offer and support in a single place. And in its first year, the page has garnered over 58,000 views. I know all of you are already familiar with the Department of Homeland Security efforts through the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnership, the National Threat Evaluation and Reporting Program Office, the National Threat Assessment Center, which has worked with all of you at NCITE to provide millions in targeted violence and terrorism prevention grant programs, educate communities and stakeholder groups, help support the creation of local prevention efforts, and assist state and local partners in establishing multidisciplinary behavioral threat assessment and management programs. And I want to end by talking about a story of success. It was a story of turning tragedy into a model for others, a model for states and local authorities across the United States. And this goes back to May 14th, 2022, after the horrific domestic terrorist attack at the Tops supermarket in Buffalo, New York. In the wake of that attack, New York State quickly engaged the Department of Homeland Security to build a statewide terrorism prevention effort. The week after the attack, the state's Homeland Security advisor hosted a team of Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice officials for a 2-day meeting to plan out next steps. With support from the Department of Homeland Security, New York quickly launched a coordinated effort to place a threat assessment and management team in every country. These teams receive referrals from schools, law enforcement, and community members. They support individuals that are referred and provide educational opportunities, mental health support, and employment-related support. And I'm really thrilled to see so many panels at this conference that are focused on prevention efforts as well. And I just want to conclude, and then I know that there's some time for questions as well, by just saying some words about how important the work that all of you do every single day is. With threats growing now more than ever, we need the work of social and behavioral scientists to help us do counterterrorism and to do prevention well. I know my good friend and colleague Nick Rasmussen will speak more about this tomorrow, but I wanted to use my voice to urge all of you to continue the really important work you do and share your results with us. We learn from you and with others inside and outside the government. And so with that, I really just want to thank you. I'm very sorry I'm not with you in person today, and look forward to your questions.
Jen, thank you so much. I'm so happy that you mentioned the New York response example. Of course, that was a horrific attack. We all remember it very well. It opened our eyes to this evolving threat landscape and how a sweet little grocery store could be a target. So with that in mind, how do you effectively communicate a domestic violent extremist threat to a starkly divided U.S. audience that may not believe the messenger? You laid out these awesome things that the federal government is doing, but who is the credible messenger when we try to communicate this threat? And what strategies has the White House done to try to overcome skepticism in the national audience?
Thanks. It's a really important question. I mean, I think, for one, the events, the horrors of the events speak for themselves. So nobody can deny the horrors of the events in Buffalo and so many other locations where there's been just unprovoked and unjustified devastation and loss of lives. The President of the United States, I think, is very focused on this issue. He speaks eloquently about it. He has met with victims all around the country and speaks to communities and family members. It is also critically important that all of us speak about this and that we continue to engage in a range of different forums. We can't, there's not a single strategy or a single person or a single message that is going to change behavior or change the willingness to receive messages of concern. But I think it is incumbent upon all of us to keep speaking, to pointing to the facts, to doing so in an objective, nonpartisan way, in focusing on communities and protection of all Americans across the country, of all, no matter where one lives, no matter what one believes. That is our job and that is our goal.
Thank you for that. I'm shocked and appalled to hear there isn't one easy answer to this question. And it's a good reminder to all of us in this room. I think we're always used to looking in another direction for somebody else to solve it, and it's a reminder that this responsibility rests with each one of us. Back to New York for a second, looking at their example, I'm thinking of Nebraska. So, at NCITE, we're trying to break down silos. What role could universities play in helping states come up with, kind of what they did and not wait for a TOPS to happen in that state?
So thanks, another great question. I do think that the New York model is a model that we would encourage every state, every county, every locality to adopt. It is so important. Some of this work, part of this work is the messaging that you were talking about before, but it's also individual by individual, case by case, and that is exactly what the New York model is doing in a really important way. A university like the University of Nebraska and anywhere else can continue to do research. I mean, we need good research on what prevention works. That is the most important thing we can do. Obviously, our job here at the White House and where I am is to identify, disrupt, and protect against potential threats. But ideally, we would get to a place where we are not needing to do so because we have done prevention and we're stopping, we're identifying actors before they get to a place where they're radicalized to violence. We're working with them, we're helping put them on the off ramp. So the more research, the more work, the more good ideas on prevention that we can come up with, we are open and eager and encourage continued development of ideas, encourage continued innovation, and want to partner with all of you on all of that really critical work.
I want to throw it to the room. Do we have anyone who might have a question? I've got a couple in my back pocket, but I want to offer the opportunity while we still have Jen. Okay, so Jen, a question from the room, and it's a good one. So right now, the attention seems to be turned toward great power competition. How do all the hot spots in the world that may have pulled our attention away from counterterrorism resources, how does DHS, how does the government deal with potential gaps there?
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, our job is to focus on all of the threats, and unfortunately, there's a lot of them. But there is an interaction between some of the threats posed by great powers and our counterterrorism efforts. So we are closely focused on those intersections, and our job is to both respond to the threats posed by major geopolitical events and also to continue to identify, track, and respond to the counterterrorism threat. As I said at the beginning, we know that the conflict in Gaza has exacerbated the counterterrorism threat, and we know that world events intersect with our counterterrorism efforts, and it is something that we are acutely focused on.
Thank you for that. This is a question we like to ask a lot because the people in this room, we could talk for hours about what keeps everybody up at night. Lots of blinking red lights everywhere, no shortage. Just open the New York Times and you'll see it too. So Jen, how do you sleep and what gives you hope about where we're headed?
I sleep lightly, but I am hopeful because there is just an incredible wealth of talent and focus and energy on, as I said, responding to the threat, understanding the threat, preventing the threat, innovating with partners, working on prevention. And I am, I gain comfort by the amount of focus that this administration has placed on the threat. I gain comfort by the incredible interagency collaboration that I see day in and day out, particularly across the intelligence community, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Justice on focusing, identifying, and responding to potential threats. I gain comfort by the incredible work that is happening with allies and partners overseas on a day-to-day basis. And I know I gain comfort also by the fact that, as I started at the beginning, over 2 decades, we have seen a significant degradation in the capability and intent of major foreign terrorist organizations. And so we know that with work and with collaboration and coordination, we can be successful, and we keep working on that every single day. I also gain hope from conferences like this and the work that all of you are doing, again, particularly on the prevention piece, which I can't emphasize enough how critically important that piece is as well.
I think that is a great note to end on. Let's end on a high note here with the White House. Jen Daskal, thank you so much for your time. And just know you have a captive audience. The brain trust on counterterrorism is in this room. And so if there is still something keeping you up at night, you let us know and we'll sick the room on it, okay? We'll solve the problem.
Thank you. I'm very sorry I can't be there with you in person, and I hope it's a wonderful conference.
Thank you, Jen. Let's give her a round of applause.